Hello there. I'm Chuck Todd. This is a bit of a special little update. I guess we could call it an addendum to the most recent episode of the Chuck ToddCast. When I taped, we had not learned of what was going on between the FCC, Disney, Jimmy Kimmel, Nexstar, and everything that's going on. And I think I just wanted to give it some context. I'll be honest. I go back and forth about how much we should be focusing on the media problems in this country and the larger issue of that versus our political problems and our political divide. But the fact is that they're all intertwined now. But I wanted to put some context around why, because I've even had questions of members of my own family sort of like, wait a minute, why is what is, I'll just answer this basic question. Disney can decide whether or not they want Jimmy Kimmel. And I think why so many folks are up in arms, right? It's not just folks on the left, but civil libertarians, frankly, across the spectrum are so alarmed by this. It's the sequence of events on how this is done. Because I'm going to make a confession. I didn't hear anything that Late Night did on Monday night about Charlie Kirk because I wasn't seeking it out. I wasn't interested. I don't have the same, I see clips of late nights. This is part of the economics of late night, right? I'm just like too many other people for the economics of late night. I just wait for the clips the next morning. When we started this back in the old days of the hotline, right? We became Washington source for, hey, tell me the best jokes that were on late night TV. And so the idea of just clipping and just having the political stuff from the late night comedians as an easy to digest morning, newsletter is something that is quite common. So when I was not following the day-to-day, was not following what Carr was doing. And then all of a sudden there's this breaking news alert about Jimmy Kimmel's off the air. So I was like, wow, how bad was the joke that he told about Charlie Kirk, right? So you go back and you think, boy, did he use Charlie Kirk as a punchline? What could he have said? And then you actually saw what he said and you're like, wait, what? He got booted off the air for this? Because when the FCC gets involved, you assume, did he say something indecent? Did he use a 4-letter word? Did he expose himself, right? Ultimately the FCC's role is about, public decency, right? And in this remark, other than, look, I didn't love his remark, and I'll tell you why. I don't like what's happening right now. There's this contest between the left and the right to prove that the other side's ideology incites more violence. That's not the problem we have here. It doesn't matter whether it's 60-30 on one end or the other. The 30 can cause just as much violence as the 60 and vice versa, right? And everybody is so worked up in the sort of in the partisan corners of wanting to prove it's the other side that incites more violence, not my side. That's not the issue. So I'm sorry he gave voice to that concept, but that's not the issue here, right? And you've heard me, I wish we would just be, hey, we've got a political violence problem. We've let this get too far. Let's identify the actual problematic source, which of course we know is these algorithms and what we've done to political discourse in this country through social media. But it's the sequence of events here that make this a violation of the Constitution. Okay. And you got to remember what the First Amendment is about: protecting the people from government influence. So the second that Brendan Carr went on a podcast and essentially threatened, like a mob boss, that's a mighty fine network you got there, Disney. That's a mighty fine merger you'd like to get completed there, Nexstar. That was coercion. That was government influence. That was an unconstitutional threat from Brendan Carr, the FCC chair. And I want to read all of his quotes here because it's fascinating how delusional this guy is about his role as FCC chair. And there's also a ton of hypocrisy in what he's saying in here. But I want to get through because the larger quote, look, everybody has seen the quote, "We can do this the easy way or the hard way." But I think his larger context matters here. So he said to this sort of one of these conspiracy theorists on the right, "In some quarters, there's a very concerted effort to try to lie to the American people about the nature of one of the most significant, newsworthy public interest acts that we've seen in a long time, and what appears to be an action by Jimmy Kimmel to play into that narrative that this was somehow a MAGA or Republican-motivated person." So that in itself, so basically what he is admitting here is that Jimmy Kimmel's sin is insulting MAGA. Jimmy Kimmel's sin had nothing to do with Charlie Kirk. This is why this is alarming so many civil libertarians. He didn't like it that MAGA was criticized. You may not like the criticism, right? 2019 Brendan Carr, by the way, would also be upset, right? We've all seen if you've been paying attention to this story, Brendan Carr in 2019 is having a huge debate with Brendan Carr 2025. We'll find out who wins that debate. And then he says this, "I've been very clear from the moment that I became chairman of the FCC, I want to reinvigorate the public interest. Broadcasters are entirely different from people that use other forms of communication. They have a license granted by us at the FCC, and that comes with an obligation to operate in the public interest." He is factually correct on that. And then he goes, "Look, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. These companies can find ways to change conduct, to take action, frankly, on Kimmel, or there's going to be additional work for the FCC ahead. This is a very, very serious issue right now for Disney." So he says that Nexstar affiliates announce what they announce, those ABC affiliates, that they're not going to carry Jimmy Kimmel. And then, of course, it puts pressure on Disney. Now, this is a reminder of the children's book that I cite all the time when it comes to capitulation to this administration on so many things that are where the law is on the side of these entities and yet they don't want to use the law. And that is if you give a mouse a cookie. The second Disney paid the extortion price on the George Stephanopoulos lawsuit, they opened themselves to more coercion. Right. You know, the second you sort of give in to the bully, the second you agree to pay a ransom. Right. Disney was being held hostage by Donald Trump. And so they paid a ransom on that with Stephanopoulos. And they came back and decided they had more that they wanted to get. Right. So Nexstar is doing this huge merger with Tegna. Tegna used to be, it's just a renamed version. It used to be the Gannett TV station. So this is going to create the largest owner of local TV affiliates who, of course, affiliate. When I say the affiliate network, some of you may be like, what the hell are you talking about? Right? If you're under the age of 35, you're like, what is this? But ABC, NBC, CBS, and Fox, the broadcast, not Fox News, the cable channel, they have local TV, over-the-air TV stations that they have relationships with. And it used to be the networks themselves owned a lion's share of this. And then over time, due to some FCC rules, there were used to be local people in the area would own the local TV station and then have affiliations with the big national broadcast networks. And then you had this consolidation, right? And Nexstar is one of these consolidated organizations. Tegna itself was a consolidated. And this merger is going to be even bigger. It needs FCC approval. Right. And it's a big deal to Nexstar to get this FCC approval. So it is shouldn't be lost on anybody that the minute this is heard, Nexstar literally coming up knows its merger with Tegna is going to get a review by the FCC. Disney is already agreed to buy out NFL's television, all of the NFL's media properties, which is going to consolidate ESPN and the NFL network into one thing. And that's something else that the FCC has oversight over. And so, this is in a way that a mobster might say, that's a mighty nice television network you might have there. It's a very serious issue right now for Disney. He didn't say it was an issue for ABC Entertainment, which is who Jimmy Kimmel works for, not even work for ABC News. He said it was an issue for Disney, Well, that means you're going after the corporation. And then, of course, they have shareholders and they have a fiduciary responsibility to shareholders. So this is why there is so much alarm. Because the irony, if Brendan Carr never does this interview, never goes public with any of this, right? He ended up, this is a self-own by Brendan Carr, right? This is if he doesn't do this interview and he behind the scenes exerts this, basically reminds Nexstar and Disney that they need their approval and they didn't like what Jimmy Kimmel said, so you might want to do something about this if you want to curry favor with us. I guess we should be thankful he said it out loud, right? He could have done this behind the scenes. We wouldn't know about it. We would all be speculating that perhaps Nexstar and Disney were either anticipating concern about this and decided to act earlier or whatever, right? In the wake of sort of a manufactured outrage. As we know, there is J.D. Vance in his when he substituted for the first show after Charlie Kirk's assassination, he called on fellow travelers to essentially dox people, right? He called on them to do this, promoted cancel culture. This is the same guy who lectured European nations a few months ago for them coming down too hard on speech. So yes, there's hypocrisy everywhere in this story, but really a lot of hypocrisy here on the right with cancel culture and things like that. So, but when he put out that call for doxing, it was clear they were looking, right? They were looking for somebody to make an example of. And, Donald Trump himself, right? I mean, this is where the law is on their side, right? Trump, after Colbert was fired by Paramount during, that whole thing so they could get that merger done so that Sherry Redstone could get her money, Trump himself said, one down, Kimmel's next. Lo and behold, what do we go? Has it been 4 weeks, 5 weeks since the Colbert news? And lo and behold, Kimmel's next. So look, Kimmel should know that if Kimmel's agent, I would assume, told him, hey, buddy, you oversee something that Disney would love to get rid of, so be careful. The smart thing to do would have been to avoid that topic altogether. But then again, they were going to find something at some point, right? This was there was no doubt he was going to be targeted. The president's obsessed with trying to silence any of his media critics. And that should be what's so alarming here, is that they're using the power of the state, right? You know what Jimmy Kimmel didn't do? He didn't call for the execution for the lethal injection of homeless people. That would have been a really disturbing thing. Oh, that happened on cable news. So in theory, the FCC doesn't have oversight over that. But it was certainly in bad taste. He apologized for, I guess, apologized for people noticing that he said something outlandish. That's what the apology felt like, rather than realizing what he said was just awful and hateful. But if the fact that it was instinctual on that, Fox News has a choice. If that's who they want representing them, go for it, right? They're a private enterprise and they can go ahead and do that. But that was an extraordinary bad taste. I didn't hear anybody on the right get upset about that. And of course, Kimmel didn't do anything that was remotely like that. Again, Kimmel's sin was criticizing MAGA. He did not disparage Charlie Kirk. He did not disparage Charlie Kirk's family. He's in fact on the record offering condolences. What he did was go after MAGA. And again, I think this is bad politics for everybody to try to blame the other side for political violence, because we're going to not only not do anything about our political violence problem, but it's likely to incite more violence. And there's a part of me that wonders if that's a feature, not a bug, if this is exactly what Stephen Miller and Brendan Carr are hoping. They want to poke and get more reaction so they can come down even harder on more institutions. on all this front. And we've seen now all these corporate look, I'm begging these corporations that are publicly traded, that own news organizations, just sell them, please. Just sell them. Do not stop this. You are destroying the information ecosystem. You are participating in this. You are undermining your own employees. This is not fair. Look what happened to John Carl earlier this week when the president threatened him and ABC News. Nobody backed him up. I didn't see Disney trying to push back on that, and there was nothing illegitimate about that question. In fact, in many cases, if it's not worth his time, but John Carl could be suing the president for defamation, right? If you accept the premise of Trump's lawsuit against the New York Times, then there's a bunch of us who have been defamed by Donald Trump over the years via his Truth Social organization, which he's an owner of, right? It makes him responsible. He's not a public figure. He's a public figure in addition to being an owner of a platform that he uses to disparage with malice, right? With malicious intent, which is always part of those things. Now, are they extraordinarily hard to prove? And as a journalist, is somebody like John Carl going, hey, man, I can take the arrows? Of course he is. But if you own a news organization and you're a publicly traded company and you're not going to stand up for your journalists, get out of the journalism business. Just put ABC News up for sale. Put all these news divisions up for sale, because you're undermining the credibility. You think their credibility's been undermined already by this concerted effort on the right to undermine the credibility of these news organizations, fairly or unfairly. Well, what you're doing is actually undermining them for everybody, right? So nobody is going to trust CBS News because of what they've done. Look, the guy they hired to be an ombudsman would be a good hire if you were just hiring a conservative ombudsman and a liberal ombudsman. If you were hiring somebody from the Hudson Institute and somebody for the Center for American Progress, then I might have some faith that CBS was trying to be something different here. But that is not what they did, right? They just catered to one side of the aisle. So what it is going to do, it already doesn't really have credibility with the right. Now they've made sure they're not going to have any credibility with the people that live in reality and the people that live on the left. So here we are. So I would just beg, if you're not going to stand up for your news organizations, the law is on your side in this. The First Amendment, the law is on your side. If the FCC had nixed the merger of Tegna and Nexstar over this, or nixed the merger of ESPN and the NFL media properties, right? And this was sort of Carr was going to weaponize his role at the FCC. The amount of evidence that Disney and the NFL would have to essentially sue and say that this was a violation of their constitutional rights, government, the government's insertion in speech, they'd have a case. But what's really scary is that they refuse to use the law to protect their business interests, and instead they're capitulating. And this is why, again, a lot of us civil libertarians are extraordinarily alarmed at how easy it is to control these entities. I personally believe this goes back to the difference between, in Trump 1.0, when he would veer into these unconstitutional territories, there were fellow Republicans and people in Trump's cabinet who were the guardrails. And when they would speak up, corporate America then would actually stiffen its spine, sort of the nonpartisan part of the nation's sort of cultural and business elite would say, whoa, this is too far. And because they felt like they had cover because it was coming from both sides of the aisle. But Donald Trump has purged the party of those Republicans that were comfortable speaking up. He's made it clear that if you speak up, I'll destroy and end your career, potentially even harm you financially. So those that might be speaking out against this government overreach, have chosen to not run for re-election if they're uncomfortable being members of Trump's political machine, right? And so, you know who those people are. I don't have to recite them by name right now, but that's what's happened. And then, so when you've had no Republican pushback, right, then you've had all these, I think corporate America has been scared away from this. And they know that the government, this administration's comfortable weaponizing government against anybody that they think is standing in their way politically. And so they won't stand up because they don't want to look, if the only people opposing Trump are people like me in the media over these things, or folks on the left, if they're the only ones critiquing what he's doing, they don't want to look like they're just, he lumps everybody in as a partisan actor. And it gets me to the core of one of my biggest sort of, and I, to my conservative friends out there who constantly think everything that isn't conservative is biased, I would say to you, Brendan Carr is a partisan conservative. He does not have the intellectual ability to know what's neutral. He thinks anything that isn't conservative is liberal, right? There's some liberals that believe this, that anything that isn't liberal, if you're not siding with them, you're part of the right-wing machine. This is how we've lost our ability to have conversations. We've lost our ability to sort of moderate, not in saying you have to be moderate, but moderating temperament, where you realize that the whole point of this, an ideological left, an ideological right, and practicing politics means it's a little bit, you take a little bit of both, and whoever's winning, maybe you get 70% of the pie, they get 30% of the pie. When we stop viewing politics that way, when we stop governing that way, where winning 49% of the vote means I get 100% of my way, right? Which is essentially what Donald Trump has done. He did not win a majority in this country. Yes, he won a plurality of the popular vote, but he did not get 50%. Doesn't even have half the support of the country. And he does not govern as if there is a robust minority out there that didn't want that point of view. If you want to be a successful president, you actually try to govern a little bit for everybody. But that isn't what he's looking for. He's looking in some cases for revenge or accumulating power. But sometimes you have an imperfect moment, an imperfect person that ends up being a galvanizing issue in the moment. I don't know whether this has long-term relevance to the midterm elections, for instance. But what I will say, and I do worry that sometimes these criticisms of that come from us folks that are worried about our civil liberties, are seen as sort of like a luxury issue, about the First Amendment, and it's all about the press and all of this stuff. But you'll care when it comes for you, right? And how I do think this stuff hurts politically long-term on the right, and that they're inviting actually a political loss over this over time, is that we know people in the middle didn't like the cancel culture that was taking place on the left, right? This idea, right? You'd hear this all the time. You're afraid of, you'd have people that weren't partisan, but would find themselves siding with those on the right that were complaining that, political thought was being weaponized against them. It would cost them jobs or cost them opportunities. A lot of people in this country don't like that. And now the Republicans are they're behaving the exact way they said they didn't like when they thought the left or other institutions were doing this to them. I mean, I will go to my grave believing the single biggest mistake we've made in the last 5 years was deplatforming Donald Trump from Twitter and Facebook. And the pressure campaign on Jack Dorsey and on Zuckerberg, when they caved on that, it just is a monumental mistake, right? That was sort of the moment that we stopped even having shared conversation, shared debate. An entirely new right-wing media ecosystem was created under the guise and umbrella of grievance, and it created the situation we're in. So, I was one of the few who said this is a mistake to not to somehow ban anybody that didn't certify the election from TV. The fact that so many of my colleagues caved to that mindset did do damage to our trust and did do damage to the electorate. But if it was wrong then, it is wrong now. And that's what's getting lost here. Okay? Deplatforming half the country, or the perception of deplatforming half the country, was wrong. It is just as wrong when that aggrieved person decides to go with revenge rather than have a principle. Are there any principles in this MAGA movement? That's what we're finding out. Are there any principles? And when it comes to the First Amendment, it's possible that those in power are just drunk with it. Stephen Miller and Brendan Carr are drunk with the power that they have in the moment. And they have completely lost the plot. They do not understand what neutrality even means. They do not understand what the role of government. They do not understand the Bill of Rights and the U.S. Constitution. Because if they did, they'd be pursuing different policies. They'd be behaving differently. So this is not a left-right issue. This is it constitutional or is it unconstitutional? And this is an extraordinarily unconstitutional act. This is a weaponizing of the government against using government power to stifle speech. It is the First Amendment in our Constitution for a reason. And so when we lose that, this entire experiment begins to crumble. So I hope people view it this way. Get out of the debate over who's more violent. Okay? Get out of that debate. That's not a debate anybody wins. All right? That's the personal critique I have of what Jimmy Kimmel, going on that narrative. That is, it's just, even, it doesn't matter if it's true. It's only in a moment. There is plenty of evidence that we've got ideological inspired violent actors that are on the left and the right. And we can have a historical argument over who's got more violent acts over time. But you know what neither side can say? Neither side can say it's zero. All right? Get out of that debate and start focusing on constitutional protections. Because what they did on this is a violation of your rights and the single most important rights that our founders thought mattered the most, because they put it in Amendment 1.